the CBSE Class 11 English course here on SWS. I am TS Sudhir. In this video, we are going to be discussing a poem called A Photograph, which is part of your Hornbill textbook. It is written by Shirley Toulson. It's a short poem, but what is remarkable about the poem is about how it operates at two different levels. It's a story within a story. जैसे फिल्मों में होता है ना, फ्लैशबैक के अंदर फ्लैशबैक होता है. So it's a story within a story. It's a story of what the poet feels. It's a story about how her mother, who is a character in the poem, feels about something which she's seeing, and both of them are talking about a photograph. The poet is seeing a photograph and the person in the photograph is seeing another photograph. So in that sense, it has that very layered kind of emotional intensity to it, which is extremely remarkable. So let's go through the poem and I will explain to you each and every word, each and every phrase, and what exactly it means in the overall context of the poem. Let's get started. Okay, let's start, and I hope you can see the poem on your screen, A Photograph by Shirley Toulson. As I said, this is the story of which operates at two different levels. Now, Shirley Toulson was an English poet, a journalist, a writer, and also a local politician. She passed away recently in 2018. What's the theme of the poem? The theme of the poem is loss. The theme of the poem is memory. Please remember these are keywords which you should use in your answers. It's also one of the themes is also what is called the transience of life. Transience of life का क्या मतलब है? It is the state of lasting for a very short time. Okay, so it's about the moment. It is about that particular moment जो कि कुछ देर के लिए रहता है, लेकिन because of the photograph, it gets kind of recorded in memory, which is why memory is also a theme of this particular poem. So the poem essentially explores how people may die, but they continue to live in the form of memories, which is why काफी लोग बोलते हैं ना, photographs की काफी अहमियत रहती है. हम photographs क्यों लेते हैं, वीडियो आजकल क्यों लेते हैं, ताकि वो एक तरह से मेमोरी रहे. Even after the person is not there, the person may move to another country, so you may not be able to see that person for 10 years, 20 years, or the person may pass away, but he or she lives on in the form of photographic memory. You are able to now see the person in photographs, or in these today's day and age in the form of videos, which is why photographs are so important for each one of us. हम हमेशा सेल्फी लेने की कोशिश करते रहते हैं, किसी को मिलते हैं सेल्फी ले लेते हैं, so that एक तरह का कनेक्ट बना रहे. Okay, of course आजकल की दुनिया में तो everything is on the mobile phone. पहले के जमाने में you would get the photographs printed and they would be inside an album, or they would be framed and put on the mantelpiece like it is the case in this particular poem. So उसकी एक अहमियत और रहती है, because you see it in front of you all the time. So what is this poem about? I've written lots of question and answers in this one. So it's a tribute to the poet's mother. This one, just like Khushwant Singh's story, which is also in first person, this one is also in first person. The poet is talking about her mother. The first one was about his grandmother, right? So it's a lot about human relations. The kind of chapters are there in your textbook, Hornbill. So the poet is essentially looking at an old photograph of her mother when the mother was 12 years old. Okay. And it is a photograph which has been taken with the mother and her mother's cousin on a beach during a beach holiday. Okay. And the poet is remembering about how the mother would look at the photograph and laugh. So you see, the memory is of the photograph and how her mother would look at the photograph. So that is there in her mind's memory, right? So the poet is able to remember that laughter. So the format of the poem is in that sense very interesting, because it captures the memory of the poet Shirley Toulson for her mother while talking about the memories of her own mother about her beach holiday. So the poet is talking about her mother and also capturing the mother's memories when the mother is kind of talking about her old memories. Samjhe? Flashback ke andar flashback. So another interesting aspect of the poem is that it has been 12 years since the poet's mother passed away, which is exactly the number of years, the age of the mother when she was in that particular photograph. That was also 12 years old. And the poem ends with an expression of grief over the loss. The cardboard shows me how it was when the two girl cousins went paddling. Paddling is to kind of, go through a body of water in a pond or a lake with the help of a paddle. Paddle जिससे कि उसको that whatever boat etc. you are on to move it. Each one holding one of my mother's hands, and she, the big girl, some 12 years or so. So she was the bigger, or she was elder to both her cousins. So the poet is looking at an old photograph which is pasted on a cardboard that shows the mother when she was 12-year old, and it shows her holding the hands of her two younger girls cousins when they had gone paddling. Simple. All three stood still to smile through their hair at the uncle with the camera. So who has shot the photograph? The uncle. Okay, the uncle has shot the photograph. So the poet here speaks about the kind of pose that they are striking the photograph. Beach holidays mein kaise khade hain, you strike a pose, especially when you are young. There is a sense of joy and gay abandon, right? So all three stood there smiling through their hair in the sense that, the hair was probably wild, flying the beach mein, there's a lot of wind, etc. So there was kind of, a sense of joy in the photograph in the way they looked also, right? At the uncle with the camera, a sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born. Obviously, she was only 12 years old at that time. So the smile is the key word out here, and the uncle who clicked the photograph is mentioned. Another keyword here is stood still. All three stood still, the way you would stand pose for a photograph, just like the photograph which had also stood still all these years. Itne saal beet gaye, right? But the photograph has also stood still. It has captured a particular moment and it has stayed there, right? Just like the three girls who had also stood still while posing for the photograph. Their hair was strewn all over their face, and that had caught the poet's attention, right? A sweet face, my mother's, that was before I was born, and the sea, which appears to have changed less, washed their terribly transient feet. Important one, let me explain that. Okay, so she mentions her mother's sweet face, okay, and she connects herself to her mother, saying that, this was obviously before I was born, and it was like many, many years ago, because the moment captured a happy moment in, because the photograph captured a happy moment in her mother's life, enjoying herself during her childhood. But while so much had changed, what had remained unchanged, jo badala nahi tha, wo tha samandar. The sea, I mean, we may talk about pollution and everything else, but the sea, largely the character of the sea remains the same, right? हम बदल जाते हैं, हम childhood में जाते हैं, middle age में जाते हैं, old age में जाते हैं, लेकिन समंदर वैसे का वैसे ही रहता है. The character of the sea does not change. That's what she's pointing out. And the sea, which appears to have changed less. The sea was just the same. The waters washed their feet, which she calls terribly transient. Now, let me explain terribly transient feet. Transient means something which is short-lived, temporary. Okay. The poet, by using this phrase, terribly transient feet, is referring to the short-term nature of human life, right? कि लोगों की जिंदगी बदल जाती है जल्दी से. It is never constant like the sea is. The sea is a constant, but human life is not constant. It constantly changes. The way we look, the way we feel, the way we are, right? At different stages of life. Also, the imprints of the feet on the sand. Feet का mention किया है. जो पैर होते हैं, जो रेत पर रहते हैं, the imprints of the feet on the sand on the beach are washed away. They also do not stay very long. They're also transient. So the feet, you may think that you're leaving your imprints on the sand, but कितनी देर तक रहते हैं? They stay for just moments before the next wave comes and washes them away. है ना? So human life also changes. The sea is the constant. Okay. I hope you have understood. Let's move to the next stanza. Some 20-30 years later, she would laugh at this snapshot. 20-30 years later, whenever she would see that particular photograph taken when she was 12 years old, she would laugh at this snapshot, means the shot which was taken, the photograph, right? She would point to Betty and Dolly. See Betty and Dolly, she would say, and look how they dressed us for the beach. So the names of the two cousins are now revealed. One is Betty, one is Dolly, right? And then of course is the poet's mother, and she would laugh at how they were dressed. You see old photographs and say, look at how I'm looking, look at what the kind of shirt I'm wearing, look at the kind of frock I'm wearing. You generally feel very amused at what it was at that moment in life, right? The sea holiday was her past, mine his her laughter. Fantastic line, superb line. So what she's saying in a very wistful, in a very nostalgic kind of a tone, with a sense of touch sadness, she's saying that the sea holiday, the beach holiday, was her mother's wonderful past from her childhood. While for the poet, listen to this carefully, while for the poet, her mother's laughter looking at that photograph is her past. Because the poet has not seen the beach holiday, but the poet has seen how her mother would react looking at the photograph of her beach holiday. So for the mother, the beach holiday was a wonderful past. For the poet, the memory of the mother looking at the photograph is her nostalgic past. Understood? Beautiful line. Both thrive with the labored ease of love. Okay, what was common to both these memories? The memory of the mother looking at the photograph, the memory of the poet looking at the mother looking at the photograph. What is common to both these moments is that both of them were accompanied by a wry smile. Wry means something which is disappointed, something which is mocking, something which is scoffing. Okay, disappointed would be most appropriate in this kind of a thing. You see it, kya maza aaya tha, you almost disappointed that that moment did not continue for long. That moment is a thing of the past now. You almost feel like, miss ho gaya. You feel nostalgia always has a sense of disappointment. There's a memory, beautiful memory, but there's also disappointment ki kash main abhi bhi wahan pe hota, kind of a thing, right? Labored ease of loss, okay, is an oxymoron. What is an oxymoron? When there are two different words with two different meanings which are put together. Now, jo ease hota hai, something which is done easily cannot be labored. और अगर किसी पे बहुत मेहनत करनी हो तो वो obviously easy नहीं है. So labored ease is an oxymoron, right? It refers to the acceptance of loss and living with it. That you know that your mother is no more and you live with that acceptance of that loss. The mother regrets over the loss of her youth and has learned to live with that loss. I am no longer the 12-year-old girl with that smile and laughter and everything and posing for the camera like that, right? The poet has lost her mother and has learned to bear that loss. So for both, there is a sense of nostalgia. There is also a sense of loss. For the mother, that's a loss. For the poet, the loss of her mother. So though time has been a healer, samay beet jata hai, people move on, right? People lose their near and dear ones, but people, zindagi kat jati hai, zindagi chalti rehti hai, right? So time has been a healer of sorts, and the narrator has come to accept that this is the eventuality of life, कि life में यही होगा. Okay, that sense of loss has not gone away. Even though time has healed, but whenever you look at it and you remember that, you feel bad about it. You feel a sense of resignation. You feel, okay, ऐसा हो गया, you miss that moment, right? So there's a sense of wistfulness, there's a sense of nostalgia. Last stanza. Now she has been dead nearly as many years as that girl lived. 12 saal ki umar, and it has been 12 years since the mother died. And of this circumstance, there is nothing to say at all. It's silence, silences. Another beautiful line. Now, the poet is pointing out that her mother passed away 12 years ago. Okay. Exactly the age of her mother in that particular beach holiday photograph. She's unable to express her grief. This circumstance, and of this circumstance, jo hai third last line mein, it refers both to the death of her mother and to the present situation of the poet, where she's absorbed in the painful memory of her mother. Okay. She realizes that the happy girl in that photograph with her two cousins, Betty and Dolly, is no longer alive, and the poet is not able to express any further. She's overcome with emotion. There is a sense of emptiness. There's a sense of vacuum that she feels, and the reality and the truth of her mother's absence fills her with sadness. Just like we saw in the Khushwant Singh story, the portrait of a lady, here also there is a sense of emptiness, there's a sense of sadness, right? And it's a constant pain that leaves her feeling very numb and silent. It's silence silences. Silence conveys a complete absence of sound. There is a complete absence of sound, and that is what is being conveyed by the last line. So I have written a whole lot of questions about, is the title of the poem appropriate? Of course it's appropriate, because the photograph is at the heart of the poem, right? It's at the heart of the poem. Please go through the answer. What do the three stanzas essentially convey? I've written that. And then I've also written notes about the different themes. Time as a theme, what are the losses we are talking about, the significance of the cardboard. This is very interesting because the cardboard is the first word in the poem. It's also the title of the poem. And cardboard kaisa hota hai? Cardboard is not something very strong. It kind of conveys a sense of fragility. Toot sakta hai, fat sakta hai. Cardboard is that kind of a material, right? So it refers to the photograph and shows that life is also very vulnerable. Life kabhi bhi ja sakti hai in that sense. Death is a theme of the poem. And then there is a sense of fondness, and then it's a sense of loss. Fondness for her mother. There's also a sense of loss, of having lost someone who was so near and dear to her. Poetic devices: stood still to smile. Alliteration, aapko malum hoga, same word being used, same alphabet being repeated, SSS. Terribly transient feet is also it's an alliteration. It's also a poetic device called transferred epithet. Okay. From an examination point of view, not important, but it's interesting to know. Uske bare mein I've explained to you, where an adjective qualifies a noun rather than the thing it is actually describing. It's also an alliteration, as I said. Labored ease of loss. It's an oxymoron, as I mentioned. And the last two lines are both alliteration as well as personification. Silence has been humanized. It has been personified, right? It's also a paradox, because silence agar chuppi hai, to chuppi kisko chup karayegi? Samjhe? You understood? How will silence anyone else, right? Because silence refers to the act of being silent. So how can silence someone else? Okay. And there are more questions about cardboard denoting what has the camera captured, what has not changed over the years, etc. Please go through all the question and answers, and you will be quite comfortable with this poem. It's a beautiful poem. It is a very emotional poem, and I'm very glad that the CBSE has actually, NCERT has actually chosen this kind of a poem, because for all you youngsters, it's also very important to be emotionally connected, to be emotionally very strong. Okay, strong as well as vulnerable. Vulnerability is also a very important emotion in life. Okay, thank you very much for watching. All the best.